The sound of a gavel echoed through the Breckenridge, Colorado courthouse as Judge Marshall pronounced the verdict that would change Josephine Eastwood's life forever. At 24 years old, she never imagined she would be standing alone, receiving the deed to a house that no one believed she deserved. The court hereby recognizes Miss Josephine Eastwood as the rightful owner of the Eastwood homestead, Judge Marshall announced, his voice carrying across the tense courtroom in the spring of 1876. Property rights transfer effective immediately. Whispers erupted throughout the room. The Eastwood property, one of the finest homesteads in Breckenridge, now belonged solely to an unmarried woman. It was unheard of, especially after the death of her father 3 months prior had left her alone in the world. Her father's business partners had contested the will, claiming a woman couldn't possibly manage such a property alone. Josephine clutched the deed in her trembling hands, feeling the weight of dozens of disapproving stares. Her auburn hair was pinned tightly beneath her black mourning bonnet, and she kept her green eyes fixed forward, refusing to acknowledge the murmurs around her. "This is an outrage," hissed Mr. Holloway, her father's former business associate who had expected to gain the property himself. "A woman cannot run a ranch. It defies natural order." Josephine gathered her skirts and walked briskly from the courthouse, head held high despite the burning in her cheeks. The spring air felt unusually cold against her skin as she stepped onto Breckenridge's main street. The mining town was bustling with activity. Freight wagons rumbled past, miners trudged to and from the nearby diggings, and women hurried to complete their shopping before returning to their homes. Home. The word resonated within her. She finally had legal claim to what had always been hers by right, if not by law. The 15 acres outside of town with the 2-story house her father had built with his own hands after striking silver 10 years ago. The house where she had grown from a girl into a woman, where she had nursed her father through his final illness while also managing the household accounts that proved she was more than capable of independence. Miss Eastwood. She turned to see Mr. Finch, the bank manager, hurrying toward her, his round face flushed from exertion. "Miss Eastwood, a moment of your time, if you please." Josephine stopped, squaring her shoulders. "Yes, Mr. Finch, I wanted to express my concerns about your current situation." He mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "A young woman living alone on the outskirts of town, it simply isn't done. Perhaps you should consider selling the property. I know several interested parties who would offer a fair price." "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Finch," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "But I have no intention of selling my father's home, my home. But the property taxes alone have been paid for the year," she interrupted. "And I intend to keep them paid. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to." She climbed into her waiting wagon, taking the reins of her father's old mare, Penny. As she guided the horse out of town, she felt a sense of triumph mixing with trepidation. The ranch was hers now, legally and irrefutably, but she knew the battle had only just begun. The 15-minute ride to her property passed quickly as she planned her next steps. The small herd of cattle would need tending, and the vegetable garden needed planting if she was to survive the next winter. She would need to hire help, but with the miners driving up wages, finding affordable labor would be difficult. As the house came into view, a handsome 2-story structure with a wide front porch and sturdy log construction, Josephine felt a wave of relief. Home at last. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard as she pulled the wagon to a stop. She climbed down, reaching for her satchel containing the precious deed and other documents. The walk to the front door was familiar, every step a reminder of countless times she had crossed this threshold. She reached for the door handle, then froze. The key. Where was her key? Josephine frantically searched her pockets, then her satchel. Her stomach dropped. In the rush and emotion of the court proceedings, she had left her house key on her bedside table that morning. "No, no, no," she muttered, trying the door handle. It was locked, just as she had left it. She hurried around to the back door, but it too was securely fastened. The windows on the first floor were all locked from the inside, her father's precaution against the occasional troublemakers that passed through the territory. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, and with it would come the spring chill. Josephine bit her lip, considering her options. She could break a window, but replacing glass in Breckenridge was expensive. She could ride back to town, but the livery would be closing, and Penny needed rest. A noise from the barn caught her attention, a horse's whinny that wasn't Penny's. Someone was on her property. Josephine's pulse quickened as she reached into her satchel and withdrew the small derringer her father had insisted she carry. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "This is private property." The barn door swung open and a tall figure emerged. Even in the dimming light, she could tell he was a stranger. He wore a dusty duster coat, well-worn boots, and a Stetson pulled low over his eyes. Most alarmingly, he had a revolver holstered at his hip. "Madam," he greeted, tipping his hat to reveal dark hair and a face tanned by the sun. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You're trespassing," she stated firmly, keeping the derringer partially concealed in the folds of her skirt. "State your business or leave." He approached slowly, hands visible at his sides. As he drew closer, Josephine noticed his eyes piercing blue against his sun-darkened skin. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps only a few years older than her own 24 years. "Name's Xavier Jackson," he said. "Your father hired me 3 months ago, just before he passed. I've been working the north pasture, clearing the new grazing land." Josephine's brow furrowed. "My father never mentioned hiring anyone new." "He was mighty sick toward the end," Xavier said gently. "He wrote me a letter in January, said he needed help preparing the ranch for spring. I arrived the day after the funeral. Your father's foreman, Mr. Peterson, confirmed my employment before he left for Denver." Josephine vaguely remembered Peterson mentioning something about new help, but in the grief and confusion following her father's death, she had paid little attention. With the legal battle for the property consuming her days, she had spent minimal time at the ranch in recent weeks. "I've been sleeping in the barn," Xavier continued. "Mr. Peterson said it would be more appropriate than the bunkhouse, with you being alone here and all." Josephine studied him, searching for any sign of deceit. His eyes met hers steadily without the shifty glance of a liar. "If you work for me, then you should know where the spare key is kept," she challenged. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Under the loose board on the east side of the porch, wrapped in oilcloth. Your father said it was the same hiding place your mother chose when they first built this house." Josephine's tension eased slightly. Only someone her father trusted would know that story. "I seem to have locked myself out," she admitted reluctantly. "Would you be so kind as to retrieve the spare key?" Xavier nodded and moved toward the porch, but after a few minutes of searching beneath the indicated board, he returned with a troubled expression. "It's not there, Miss Eastwood." "The oilcloth is there, but the key's gone." Josephine's heart sank. "That's impossible, it's always there." "When was the last time you checked it?" she thought back. "Before my father fell ill, so maybe 4 months ago." Xavier rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "There's been some unsavory types passing through lately. Maybe someone found it." A chill that had nothing to do with the evening air ran through Josephine. The thought of someone having access to her home while she was away was terrifying. "What do we do now?" she asked, hating how vulnerable she sounded. Xavier glanced at the house, then back at her. "I don't see that we have many options, Miss Eastwood. Unless you want to ride back to town, we're going to have to break in." "Break in to my own house?" The very idea seemed ludicrous. "I could try the windows first," he offered, "but if they're all locked." Josephine nodded, deciding quickly. "Try the windows. If that doesn't work." She hesitated. "Do what you must." Xavier examined every window on the first floor, confirming they were all securely locked. He checked the doors again, examining the locks carefully. "Back door looks simplest," he announced. "Least damage that way." Josephine watched anxiously as he positioned himself, bracing one shoulder against the door. "You might want to look away, Miss Eastwood," he suggested. "This won't be pretty." But Josephine found she couldn't look away. There was something compelling about this man, Xavier Jackson, with his confident manner and respectful address. He didn't question her ownership of the property or suggest she couldn't manage it. He simply offered his help as an employee would. With a powerful thrust, Xavier slammed his shoulder against the door. The wood creaked but held. He backed up and tried again, this time with more force. On the third attempt, the jam splintered and the door flew open. "There you go, Miss Eastwood," he said, breathing heavily from the exertion. "You're back in." Josephine hurried past him into the familiar comfort of her kitchen. Everything was just as she had left it that morning, though a thin layer of dust had accumulated on the surfaces. She hadn't had time for proper housekeeping during the court battle. "Thank you, Mr. Jackson," she said, turning to face him as he lingered in the doorway. "I appreciate your assistance." "Doors can be fixed," he said with a slight shrug. "I'll get on that first thing tomorrow." "Tomorrow," she repeated, suddenly remembering her new status. "Yes, well, I suppose we should discuss your continued employment." Xavier removed his hat, revealing thick black hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "If you'd prefer I leave, I understand." A woman alone has to be careful about her reputation. The statement held no judgment, just a simple acknowledgement of reality. Josephine felt a surge of gratitude for his understanding. "No," she decided. "The work still needs doing, and if my father trusted you, that's good enough for me. But we should clarify terms." "Yes, madam. First, you'll continue to sleep in the bunkhouse, not the barn. It's more comfortable, and I won't have my employees suffering unnecessarily." "The bunkhouse is closer to the main house," he pointed out. "People might talk." "People will talk regardless," she replied with a hint of bitterness. "I've just won a court case against half the businessmen in town. My reputation is already the subject of speculation. We might as well be practical." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "As you wish, Miss Eastwood. Second, I expect a full accounting of what you've accomplished these past months and what remains to be done. I keep records in my saddlebag. I can bring them to you in the morning." "Good." Josephine hesitated, then asked, "Have you been paid?" "Your father provided an advance." "I've been managing." "We'll sort that out as well," she said decisively. "For now, I think we could both use some rest. It's been a trying day." Xavier nodded, replacing his hat. "I'll fix that door first thing tomorrow. For tonight, I can rig something to keep it closed." As he worked to temporarily secure the damaged door, Josephine moved around the kitchen, lighting lamps against the growing darkness. The familiar routine was comforting after weeks of boarding house living during the court proceedings. "That should hold until morning," Xavier announced, stepping back to examine his work. He had wedged a chair beneath the handle and nailed a spare board across the frame. "Not pretty, but functional. Thank you again, Mr. Jackson." "Most folks call me X," he said, then added with a hint of embarrassment, "My full name is a mouthful." "X," she repeated, trying it out. "Very well, and you may call me Miss Josephine if you prefer. Miss Eastwood was my mother." He nodded, a trace of a smile warming his features. "Good night, Miss Josephine." After he left, Josephine secured the front door and moved through the house, reacquainting herself with each room. Her father's study remained untouched, his pipe still resting in the ashtray beside his favorite chair. Her bedroom upstairs was just as she had left it, the key sitting accusingly on her bedside table. As she prepared for bed, Josephine found her thoughts drifting to her new employee. Xavier Jackson was not what she had expected. Unlike most men she'd encountered, he seemed to accept her authority without question. There was a quiet competence about him that she found reassuring. She would need that competence in the days ahead. The ranch wouldn't run itself, and she was determined to prove every doubter in Breckenridge wrong. With Xavier's help, perhaps it wouldn't be quite as daunting as she had feared. Morning came with the crowing of the rooster and the warm glow of sunrise through Josephine's bedroom window. For the first time in weeks, she awoke in her own bed, momentarily disoriented before remembering the events of the previous day. The court case, the deed, being locked out, Xavier. She dressed quickly in a practical work dress of brown cotton, pinning her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. The house was quiet as she descended the stairs, but through the kitchen window, she could see Xavier already at work repairing the back door. He had removed it completely from its hinges and was planing down the splintered edge. Josephine busied herself preparing breakfast, the familiar routine of stoking the stove and mixing biscuit dough soothing her nerves. By the time the coffee was percolating, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma, Xavier had rehung the door and was testing its swing. "Good morning, Miss Josephine," he called, noticing her at the window. "Door's almost good as new. Thank you. Breakfast will be ready shortly if you'd care to join me." Xavier looked surprised at the invitation. "That's mighty kind, but not necessary. I've got some jerky in my pack." "Nonsense," she replied firmly. "You're working for me, and I won't have you starting the day without a proper meal." It's practical, not kindness. A hint of amusement flickered in his blue eyes. Well, when you put it that way, I accept. Let me just wash up. 10 minutes later, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table, plates laden with biscuits, eggs, and the last of the bacon from Josephine's trip to town. Xavier ate with the hearty appetite of a man accustomed to physical labor, but his manners were surprisingly refined. "These biscuits are exceptional, Miss Josephine," he commented. "Reminds me of my mother's." "Is your family nearby?" she asked, realizing she knew nothing about him beyond what he had shared yesterday. Xavier shook his head. "No, madam, my folks had a small spread near Santa Fe. Lost it during a drought 5 years back. They moved to California to live with my older sister, but I headed east instead. Been working ranches across the territory since." "How did my father find you?" "Mutual acquaintance in Denver. I was looking for work, and your father needed someone who knew both cattle and horses." He took a sip of coffee. "He said he was planning to expand the horse breeding operation, wanted someone with experience breaking Mustangs." Josephine nodded slowly. Her father had mentioned wanting to shift from predominantly cattle to horses, believing there was more profit in supplying the mining operations with sturdy workhorses. "What work have you completed so far?" she asked. Xavier reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "I've been keeping notes, like I mentioned. Cleared the north pasture of rocks and brush, repaired about half the fence line, and started breaking that bay gelding your father purchased in January." Josephine scanned his neat handwriting, impressed by the detailed accounting. "And what remains to be done?" "Spring's always busy. The cattle need moving to summer pasture, the remaining fence needs mending, and we should plant the hayfield soon if you want a good cutting by August." He hesitated. "There's also the matter of the foals. 2 of your mares are due any day now." Josephine felt a momentary panic. Her father had always handled the horse breeding side of the ranch, while she managed the household and garden. She knew the basics of animal husbandry but had never attended a difficult foaling. "I see," she said, trying to sound confident. "We'll need to prepare the foaling stalls then." "Already done," Xavier assured her. "I've been checking on them every few hours. First-time mothers can be unpredictable." Relief washed over her. "You seem very thorough, Mr. Jackson X. Just doing what I was hired for, Miss Josephine." After breakfast, Josephine insisted on helping with the morning chores. She had maintained the kitchen garden and cared for the chickens during her father's illness. But the larger operation of the ranch had fallen to Peterson, who had left shortly after her father's death, claiming he couldn't work for a woman. Xavier showed no such reservations as they worked side by side, checking on the pregnant mares, feeding the small herd of cattle, and assessing what supplies would be needed from town. He explained each task clearly without being condescending, respecting her position as owner while acknowledging her inexperience with certain aspects of ranching. By midday, Josephine's respect for Xavier had grown considerably. He was knowledgeable, efficient, and she had to admit pleasant company. His quiet confidence was a stark contrast to the blustering, patronizing manner of most men she'd dealt with in Breckenridge. As they walked back to the house for the midday meal, Xavier gestured toward the garden plot. "That needs turning over soon if you're planning to plant. Ground's finally thawed enough." "I know," Josephine sighed. "I've been staying in town during the court case, so everything's behind schedule. I'll get to it tomorrow." "I could help if you'd like," he offered. "Wouldn't take long with both of us working." Josephine smiled, genuinely touched by the offer. "That would be wonderful, thank you." The afternoon passed in a blur of activity as they settled into a working rhythm. Xavier continued mending fences while Josephine took inventory of the pantry and root cellar, making lists of what they would need to purchase in town. The reality of managing the ranch was daunting, but having capable help made it seem possible. As the sun began its descent, Xavier appeared at the kitchen door. "Miss Josephine, you might want to come to the barn. The roan mare's starting to show signs." Josephine quickly set aside the ledger she had been reviewing and followed him to the barn. Inside, one of the pregnant mares was pacing restlessly in her stall, occasionally pausing to look back at her flanks. "Is she in labor?" Josephine asked anxiously. "Early stages," Xavier confirmed. "Could be hours yet, but I thought you might want to be here." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "You knew this was important to me," he nodded. Your father mentioned how much you loved the horses, said you had a special way with them, even as a little girl. Emotion tightened Josephine's throat. He talked about me. All the time, Xavier said softly. He was real proud of you, Miss Josephine, said you had your mother's beauty and twice her determination. Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes, but she blinked them away. Thank you for telling me that. They settled in to wait, Xavier bringing a lantern and 2 stools into the barn aisle. As darkness fell, they took turns checking on the mare, whose discomfort was visibly increasing. Will she be all right? Josephine asked after a particularly distressed whinny from the mare. She's strong and healthy, Xavier assured her. Most foalings go just fine without any help from us. We're just here in case there's trouble. To pass the time, Xavier shared stories of other foalings he had attended, including twin colts born during a thunderstorm in Wyoming. His deep voice was soothing in the dim barn, and Josephine found herself relaxing despite the tension of the situation. How did you learn so much about horses? She asked. My grandfather was Comanche, Xavier replied. He could gentle a wild Mustang faster than anyone I ever saw. Taught me that horses can read your intentions better than people can. Your grandfather was Comanche. Josephine couldn't hide her surprise. Looking more carefully at Xavier's features in the lamplight, she could see hints of his heritage in his high cheekbones and straight nose. On my mother's side, he confirmed, my father was Irish, makes for an interesting family tree. Josephine thought about the prejudice such a heritage might have subjected him to. That can't have been easy, Xavier shrugged. Some places are worse than others. Your father didn't seem to mind. Said he judged a man by his work, not his bloodline. That sounds like him, Josephine smiled, remembering her father's often stated views on character versus circumstances. He believed strongly in giving people a fair chance. Including his daughter, Xavier observed. Not many men would leave a ranch to a woman, even their own daughter. He knew I loved this place as much as he did, Josephine said, looking around the familiar barn, and that I was capable of running it with the right help. Their conversation was interrupted by a loud nickering from the mare's stall. Xavier quickly moved to check on her with Josephine close behind. It's time, he announced. She's lying down now. For the next hour they watched as nature took its course. The mare strained and pushed, and finally a tiny hoof appeared, followed by another and then a muzzle. Everything's positioned correctly, Xavier murmured. She's doing fine. With several more powerful contractions, the foal slid into the world in a rush of fluid. The mare immediately began to lick her newborn, cleaning away the birth membranes while the foal lay quivering in the straw. It's a filly, Xavier said, his voice warm with satisfaction. A beautiful little filly. Josephine couldn't tear her eyes away from the miracle unfolding before her. Within 20 minutes, the wobbly foal was attempting to stand, its spindly legs splaying comically as it struggled to rise. Come on, little one, Josephine encouraged softly. You can do it. After several attempts, the foal managed to stand, swaying precariously before finding its balance. With an instinct as old as time, it began searching for its mother's udder, soon nursing vigorously. Perfect, Xavier declared. Couldn't ask for a better outcome. Josephine realized she was smiling so broadly her cheeks hurt. She's magnificent. What will you name her? Xavier asked. Josephine considered for a moment. Hope, she decided. Her name is Hope. They stayed to ensure the mare and foal were bonding properly, then left them to rest. The night air was cool and clear as they walked from the barn to the house, stars glittering overhead in the vast Colorado sky. Thank you for including me, Josephine said as they reached the back porch. That was remarkable, Xavier smiled, the most genuine smile she had seen from him yet. No better reminder of why we do this work than watching new life come into the world. In that moment, with his face illuminated by starlight and his eyes bright with shared joy, Josephine felt something shift between them, a connection that went beyond employer and employee. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. Good night, X, she said, suddenly needing distance to process her confused emotions. Good night, Miss Josephine, sleep well. As she prepared for bed that night, Josephine found herself replaying the day's events in her mind. In just 24 hours, her perspective had changed dramatically. The ranch no longer seemed an impossible burden, but a challenge she could meet with Xavier's help. And therein lay the complication. Xavier Jackson was not just a capable ranch hand, but a man whose quiet strength and integrity were increasingly appealing. A man who treated her with respect rather than condescension. A man whose smile made her heart beat just a little faster. Such feelings were dangerous. She needed to maintain a professional relationship if she hoped to succeed as a woman rancher in a man's world. Any hint of impropriety would give the town gossips exactly what they were waiting for: proof that Josephine Eastwood couldn't manage on her own. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, it was Xavier's blue eyes she saw in her mind, and the memory of his voice describing her father's pride that warmed her heart. The following weeks established a routine that suited them both. Mornings began early with shared breakfast and chore planning. Days were filled with the labor of spring planting, fence repair, and animal care. Evenings often found them on the porch, reviewing the day's accomplishments and planning for tomorrow. Despite Josephine's determination to maintain professional distance, she found herself looking forward to these quiet evening conversations. Xavier proved to be not just hardworking but educated, often surprising her with his knowledge of literature or history. He had a dry wit that emerged more frequently as they grew comfortable with each other, and a thoughtfulness that manifested in small kindnesses: a wildflower placed on her breakfast plate, a particularly fine piece of wood set aside for a broken chair leg she'd been meaning to fix. In turn, Josephine found herself sharing more of her own thoughts and dreams with Xavier. She told him about her mother's death when she was 12, about learning to manage the household while her father built their ranching operation, about her secret ambition to breed a line of horses specifically suited to the high country conditions of Colorado. "That's a fine ambition," Xavier had said, genuine interest in his expression. "With those 2 new foals and the mares you have, you've got a good foundation." His belief in her capability was a balm after the constant skepticism she faced in town. The ranch was flourishing under their joint efforts, but Breckenridge's opinion of her endeavor remained unchanged. Each trip to town brought new slights and doubts, veiled insults about her unmarried status, and predictions of failure. "Miss Eastwood, I hear you've hired a hand to help run things," Mrs. Whitmore commented during one visit to the general store. "How practical of you, though a woman alone with a male employee. Well, I'm sure you've considered the implications." "I've considered the implications of failing to maintain my father's legacy, Mrs. Whitmore," Josephine had replied coolly. That concern outweighs any idle gossip, but such encounters left her drained and frustrated. Returning to the ranch, where Xavier's steady presence and unquestioning support awaited, became increasingly precious. 6 weeks after the court ruling, Josephine sat at her father's desk reviewing the ranch accounts. The financial situation was tighter than she had hoped. While they were managing the day-to-day operations, unexpected expenses had depleted her reserves. The roof needed repairs before winter, and they would need to purchase hay if the summer remained as dry as it had begun. A knock at the study door drew her attention from the troubling figures. Xavier stood in the doorway, his expression serious. "Miss Josephine, we need to discuss something." She gestured for him to enter. "What is it?" "I found tracks on the north property line today. Someone's been riding the boundary, and recently," Josephine frowned. "Perhaps just a traveler passing through," Xavier shook his head. "Same horse multiple days, they're watching the place." A chill ran down Josephine's spine. "Mr. Holloway," she said quietly. "He made it clear at the courthouse that he wouldn't accept the judge's decision easily." "Holloway, he's the one who expected to get the ranch." "Yes, he and my father had some business arrangements, but nothing that entitled him to any part of this property." She sighed. "Though he seems to believe otherwise." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Has he threatened you directly?" "Not in so many words, but there have been comments, suggestions that I'd be better off selling to someone who knows the business. Someone like him." "Precisely." Josephine closed the ledger, making a decision. "I'll need to speak with Sheriff Davis. This trespassing has to stop." "I'll accompany you to town tomorrow," Xavier said firmly. "That's not necessary." "It is," he interrupted, then added more gently, "for my peace of mind, if nothing else." The concern in his eyes warmed her even as the situation filled her with dread. "Very well. We'll go first thing in the morning." That night, A sound woke Josephine from a restless sleep. She sat up, straining to identify the noise that had disturbed her. There it was again, a horse's nervous whinny from the direction of the barn. Moving quickly, she pulled on a robe over her nightgown and grabbed the rifle her father had taught her to use years ago. The house was dark and silent as she made her way downstairs and peered out the front window. A lantern flickered in the barn, the light visible through the partially open door. Josephine's heart raced. Xavier would have announced himself or come to the house first if he needed to check on the animals. She hesitated, considering her options. The sensible choice would be to remain safely inside and wait until morning. But if someone was threatening her horses, perhaps even Hope, and the other new foal, she couldn't stand by and do nothing. Decision made, Josephine quietly opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The night air was cool against her skin as she moved carefully toward the barn, rifle at the ready. As she drew closer, she could hear low voices from inside. "Just take the 2 best mares and the foals," a man was saying. "That'll hurt her more than anything." "Without breeding stock, she's got nothing. What about the cowboy?" another voice asked. "He's been sleeping in the bunkhouse. We'll be gone before he knows what happened. Now hurry up." Rage flooded Josephine at the realization that Holloway, for she recognized his voice, was planning to steal her horses, including the foals. Without thinking, she stepped into the barn doorway, rifle raised. "Get away from my horses," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Holloway and another man spun around, surprise evident on their faces in the lantern light. They had already haltered one of the mares and were leading her toward the door. "Miss Eastwood," Holloway recovered quickly, his tone condescending. "You should be more careful wandering around at night with a rifle. Someone might get hurt." "The only people at risk of getting hurt are trespassers and horse thieves," Josephine replied coldly. "Release that mare and leave my property immediately." Holloway laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet barn. "Or what? You'll shoot us. I doubt you've got the stomach for it, girl." "Maybe she doesn't, but I do." Xavier's voice came from behind her, and Josephine had never been so relieved to hear anyone speak. He moved to stand beside her, his own revolver trained steadily on Holloway. "This doesn't concern you, half-breed," Holloway spat. "This is between me and the Eastwood girl." Xavier's expression didn't change, but his voice hardened. "You're stealing horses from my employer on property where I'm paid to maintain security. I'd say that makes it very much my concern." The second man, younger and clearly nervous, shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Holloway, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Holloway snapped. His eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. "This isn't over, Josephine. A woman can't run a ranch alone. You'll fail, and when you do, I'll be waiting to pick up the pieces at half what they're worth now." "I'm not alone," Josephine stated firmly, "and I'm not failing. Now get out before I decide horse thieves deserve a more permanent solution than a warning." For a tense moment, Josephine thought Holloway might risk violence. But apparently thinking better of it, he nodded to his companion, who released the mare's halter. "You've made a powerful enemy tonight," Holloway warned as he backed toward the door. "Both of you. We'll take our chances," Xavier replied evenly, not lowering his gun until both men had mounted their horses and ridden away. Once they were gone, Josephine's knees went weak with delayed fear and anger. She leaned against a stall door, rifle barrel pointing safely at the ground. "You shouldn't have confronted them alone," Xavier said, holstering his revolver. "It was dangerous." "I couldn't let them take the horses," she replied. "Especially not Hope." Xavier's stern expression softened. "I understand, but next time come get me first." "I will," Josephine promised, suddenly acutely aware that she was standing in the barn in nothing but her nightgown and robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. In the lantern light, Xavier's gaze seemed to linger on her face before deliberately turning away. "We should check all the horses," he said, his tone professional once more. "Make sure they didn't harm any of them." They worked in silence, examining each animal for signs of distress or injury. All appeared well, though the mares were agitated from the disruption. "We'll need to set a watch for the next few nights," Xavier said as they finished. "Holloway might try again." Josephine nodded, exhaustion settling over her now that the danger had passed. "We'll speak to the sheriff first thing tomorrow. Horse theft is a hanging offense in Colorado territory." "Yes, but we need proof." Xavier ran a hand through his hair, disheveled from sleep. Our word against his might not be enough, especially with his standing in the community. And my lack thereof, you mean? Xavier looked at her directly, his blue eyes intense in the low light. Your standing should be higher than any man's in that town. You've done what most of them couldn't, kept this ranch running through grief and legal battles, and now outright sabotage. The conviction in his voice brought unexpected tears to Josephine's eyes. Thank you for believing that. It's not belief, Miss Josephine, it's fact. He hesitated, then added softly, you should get some rest. I'll keep watch for the remainder of the night. You need sleep too, she protested. I'll catch up tomorrow. His tone brooked no argument. Go on now, you're safe. As Josephine walked back to the house, she realized that for the first time since her father's death, she truly did feel safe, not because of locked doors or legal documents, but because of the man standing guard in her barn, whose respect and protection meant more to her with each passing day. The following morning, they rode to Breckenridge together, the events of the night still fresh in their minds. The town was bustling with its usual activity, miners heading to the diggings, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, freight wagons delivering goods to the various businesses. Sheriff Davis was at his desk when they entered the jailhouse, his weathered face registering surprise at seeing Josephine accompanied by Xavier. Miss Eastwood, he greeted, standing. What can I do for you today? Josephine explained the situation succinctly, the boundary riding, the attempted horse theft, and Holloway's threats. The sheriff listened, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When she finished, he sighed heavily. That's a serious accusation, Miss Eastwood. Mr. Holloway is a respected businessman in this town. And I'm a witness, Xavier added firmly. I saw him with my own eyes attempting to steal valuable breeding stock. Sheriff Davis's gaze shifted to Xavier, taking in his appearance with poorly disguised skepticism. And you are? Xavier Jackson, I work for Miss Eastwood. I see. The sheriff's tone suggested he saw a great deal more than was being stated. Well, without more evidence than your word against his, there's not much I can do officially. But I'll have a word with Mr. Holloway, make it clear that I'm aware of the situation. That's not good enough, Josephine protested. He trespassed on my property and attempted to steal my horses, and if he tries again, we'll deal with it, the sheriff assured her. But for now, consider this a warning to both parties. Keep your distance from each other, and maybe this will all blow over. Josephine left the sheriff's office fuming at the dismissive treatment. Xavier remained silent until they had purchased their supplies and were heading back to the ranch. He didn't believe us, she said bitterly. He believed us, Xavier corrected. He just didn't want to act on it. Holloway has influence and the sheriff doesn't want trouble, so we're on our own. Xavier nodded grimly. For now, but we'll be prepared if Holloway tries anything else. Over the next week, they established a watch rotation, with Xavier taking most of the night shifts despite Josephine's protests. The constant vigilance was exhausting but necessary. Twice more they spotted riders near the property line, though no further incursions occurred. The strain began to show on both of them. Xavier grew quieter, the shadows under his eyes darkening as he pushed himself to work through the days and watch through the nights. Josephine worried about him even as she admired his dedication. You need to rest, she insisted one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner. You can't keep this pace indefinitely. I'm fine, he replied, but his weary smile belied the words. You're not, Josephine countered. And neither am I. This situation with Holloway is wearing us both down. Xavier's expression turned thoughtful. There might be another solution, he said slowly, but you may not like it. At this point, I'm open to suggestions. Hire more help, he proposed. With more hands, we could maintain a proper watch rotation without exhausting ourselves. And it would make the ranch a less appealing target. Josephine shook her head reluctantly. I'd love to, but we can't afford it right now. The finances are stretched thin as it is. Xavier was quiet for a moment, then said, I know some men, good workers, who would accept room and board plus a small wage now with the promise of full pay after harvest. Men who wouldn't be put off by working for a woman. Friends of yours, brothers of a sort, we worked together in Wyoming. One's a blacksmith who could save us money on repairs. The other's the best tracker I've ever met, half Apache, and can read sign like most men read books. Josephine considered the proposal. Additional help would ease their workload considerably, and having more men on the property would certainly deter Holloway. But it would also mean more mouths to feed and more complications in her already precarious position as a female rancher. "How soon could they get here?" she asked finally. "They're working near Fairplay. Could be here within a week if I send word tomorrow." Josephine nodded, decision made. "Do it. And in the meantime, you're taking tonight off from watch duty. I mean at X, I'll take the first shift." To her surprise, Xavier didn't argue. "Thank you," he said simply. "I could use a full night's sleep." Their fingers brushed as he handed her the rifle, and Josephine felt that now familiar flutter in her chest at the contact. Their eyes met briefly before Xavier looked away, clearing his throat. "Wake me at midnight for the second shift," he instructed, "and stay in the barn where it's safer." "I will," she promised, watching as he walked to the bunkhouse, his usually straight shoulders slightly bowed with exhaustion. Josephine settled into the barn for her watch, making herself comfortable on a hay bale with the rifle across her lap. The night was peaceful, with only the occasional soft nickering of the horses to break the silence. She found her thoughts returning again and again to Xavier. In the 2 months since he had broken down her door and entered her life, he had become essential to her in ways that went far beyond his role as a ranch hand. His steady presence gave her strength. His quiet approval meant more than the acceptance of the entire town of Breckenridge. And his rare smiles, those transformed his serious face and sent her pulse racing every time. She was falling in love with him. The realization didn't shock her as much as she might have expected. Perhaps because the feeling had been growing for weeks, taking root so gradually that by the time she recognized it, it was already flourishing. But what of Xavier's feelings? He respected her, certainly, cared for her welfare without question. But did he see her as a woman, or merely as his employer? The professional distance he maintained gave her few clues, though she sometimes caught him watching her with an expression that made her wonder. Midnight came too quickly, and with reluctance, Josephine made her way to the bunkhouse to wake Xavier for his shift. She knocked softly on the door, not wanting to startle him. "X, it's midnight." No response came from within. Josephine frowned, knocking again more firmly. "Xavier." Still nothing. Concerned, she carefully opened the door. The bunkhouse was dark, but in the moonlight streaming through the window, she could see Xavier's form on the narrow bed. His breathing was deep, and even the exhaustion of weeks having finally claimed him. Josephine stood uncertainly in the doorway. She should wake him, that had been their agreement. But looking at his peaceful face, the worry lines smoothed away in sleep, she couldn't bring herself to disturb him. "Sleep well," she whispered, backing out and closing the door quietly. Returning to the barn, Josephine resigned herself to maintaining the watch alone. The night was clear, stars brilliant in the vast Colorado sky. She checked on the horses, particularly the new foals, who were growing rapidly. Hope nickered softly as Josephine approached, recognizing her presence. "Hello, beautiful girl," Josephine murmured, stroking the filly's soft muzzle. "You're going to be something special, aren't you?" A sound outside the barn made Josephine freeze. She listened intently, rifle ready. There it was again, the unmistakable crunch of boots on gravel. Someone was approaching the barn. Heart pounding, Josephine moved quickly to position herself near the door, hidden in the shadows. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped. She held her breath, finger resting lightly on the trigger. The barn door creaked open and a figure slipped inside. In the dim moonlight filtering through the windows, Josephine could make out the silhouette of a man, not Xavier, and not anyone she recognized. "Who's there?" she called firmly, raising the rifle. "Identify yourself or I'll shoot." The man spun toward her voice, something metallic glinting in his hand. "You should be in bed, Miss Eastwood," he said, his tone chilling. "Mr. Holloway just wants to talk business." "Breaking into my property in the middle of the night isn't business, it's trespassing," Josephine replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Leave now." The man took a step toward her. "Can't do that. Got orders to bring you to town, willing or not." Fear turned to anger at the implied threat. Without hesitation, Josephine fired the rifle into the ceiling of the barn, the shot deafeningly loud in the confined space. The man ducked, cursing. The horses neighed in alarm, some kicking at their stalls in panic. In the confusion, the intruder lunged toward Josephine, knocking the rifle from her hands. She stumbled backward, searching desperately for a weapon. Her hand closed around a pitchfork leaning against the wall, and she swung it wildly at her attacker. The tines caught his arm, tearing his sleeve and drawing blood. "You little wildcat," he growled, advancing on her again. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Before he could reach her, the barn door burst open and Xavier charged in, revolver drawn. "Step away from her," he commanded, his voice deadly calm. The intruder hesitated, glancing between Josephine and Xavier, clearly calculating his odds. "Don't," Xavier warned, cocking the hammer of his revolver. "Whatever Holloway's paying you, it's not worth dying for." For a tense moment, Josephine thought the man might still try something desperate. Then, slowly, he raised his hands. "Tie him up," Xavier instructed Josephine, keeping his gun trained on the intruder. "There's rope on the wall behind you." With shaking hands, Josephine secured the man's wrists and ankles, using the knots her father had taught her years ago. Only when he was thoroughly bound did Xavier lower his weapon. "I heard the shot," he explained, turning to Josephine with concern etched on his face. "Are you hurt?" "No," she assured him. "He didn't get the chance." Xavier's eyes lingered on her face, relief evident in his expression. "You should have woken me. You needed the rest. Not at the risk of your safety." His voice was rough with emotion. "Never that." Something in his tone made Josephine's breath catch. For a heartbeat, the rest of the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them in the dimly lit barn. The moment was broken by a groan from their captive. Xavier's expression hardened as he turned his attention back to the intruder. "What's your name?" he demanded. "None of your damn business," the man muttered. Xavier crouched beside him, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "Let me be clear. You broke onto private property with the intent to abduct a woman. That's enough to hang you in any territory. So I suggest you start talking if you want any chance of seeing the morning." The threat had its intended effect. "Name's Reese," the man admitted grudgingly. "Holloway hired me to bring the woman to town, said he just wanted to talk sense into her about selling the ranch." At gunpoint. Josephine asked incredulously, gesturing to the revolver that had fallen from Reese's hand during the struggle. Reese shrugged as much as his bonds would allow. "Said to use whatever means necessary, didn't specify." Xavier and Josephine exchanged a look of grim understanding. This was more serious than mere intimidation or attempted theft. Holloway was escalating dangerously. "We need to take him to the sheriff," Josephine said. "This time Davis will have to act." Xavier nodded agreement. "At first light, for now, we'll keep him secure in the tack room." They moved Reese to the small room off the main barn, ensuring he was both comfortable enough to prevent claims of mistreatment, but secure enough to prevent escape. Xavier insisted on maintaining watch over their prisoner while Josephine tried to get some rest. "I'm not leaving you alone with him," she protested. "He's tied securely," Xavier assured her, "and I'll be armed. You need sleep, Miss Josephine." The formal address reminded her of their respective positions, cooling the warmth that had been growing between them during the crisis. She was his employer, nothing more. Despite the care and concern he showed, Xavier maintained that professional boundary. "Very well," she conceded, "but wake me before you leave for town in the morning. We'll go together." Xavier nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Get some rest." "Tomorrow may be challenging." Josephine returned to the house, but sleep eluded her despite her exhaustion. Her mind raced with the implications of the night's events, and with thoughts of Xavier, the way he had burst into the barn without hesitation, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, the moment when something unspoken had passed between them. By dawn, she had given up on rest and was dressed and ready when Xavier came to the house. They secured Reese in the back of the wagon and set out for Breckenridge as the sun crested the mountains, painting the landscape in hues of gold and pink. Sheriff Davis was considerably more attentive when presented with a bound prisoner and a detailed account of the night's events. "Kidnapping is a federal offense," he acknowledged gravely. "Even attempted kidnapping. And Holloway ordered it," Xavier added firmly. The sheriff sighed, running a hand over his graying beard. "Reese's word against Holloway's on that count, but the trespassing and assault charges will stick at least." "I want protection for Miss Eastwood," Xavier insisted. "Holloway has made multiple threats against her and her property." "I can increase patrols near the ranch," Davis offered, "but my jurisdiction and resources are limited." What about a restraining order? Josephine suggested. I can issue one, the sheriff agreed. It won't stop someone determined to cause trouble, but it gives us legal grounds to arrest Holloway if he comes near your property again. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than nothing. As they left the sheriff's office, Josephine felt a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. The immediate threat was contained, but Holloway remained at large and clearly desperate to gain control of her ranch. We should get those supplies we need while we're in town, Xavier suggested, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back as he guided her through the crowded street. The protective gesture seemed unconscious on his part, but Josephine was acutely aware of the warmth of his touch. At the general store, they were met with curious stares and hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when they approached. Word of Reese's arrest had clearly spread quickly. Miss Eastwood, Mr. Peterson, the storekeeper, greeted her with unusual deference. What can I help you with today? They gathered the necessary supplies efficiently, and Josephine was surprised when Mr. Peterson offered to have the heavier items delivered to the ranch. No charge for delivery, he assured her. Least we can do for a neighbor dealing with such difficulties. As they loaded their remaining purchases into the wagon, Josephine marveled at the change in attitude. They're treating us differently, Xavier nodded. Standing up to Holloway has earned you some respect. He's not universally liked, just feared. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than usual, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The events of the night had shifted something between them, creating a tension that was neither uncomfortable nor easily defined. As they crested the final hill before the ranch came into view, Xavier broke the silence. The men I wrote to they responded while you were gathering supplies. They'll be here by the end of the week. That's good news, Josephine said, genuinely pleased. We could use the help. There's something else, Xavier continued, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. With everything that's happened, I think it would be best if I moved back into the barn for now. Josephine turned to look at him in surprise. The barn, why, people are talking, he said simply. Last night's events will only fuel the gossip. For your reputation, my reputation, Josephine interrupted, a flash of anger cutting through her exhaustion. My reputation was compromised the moment I chose to run this ranch alone. Moving you to the barn won't change that. It might help, Xavier insisted. Show the town you're maintaining proprieties. The town can mind its own business, Josephine retorted. I need you rested and ready, not sleeping poorly in a drafty barn because of what some gossips might say. Xavier's hands tightened on the reins. It's not just about gossip, Miss Josephine. It's about your safety and future if you ever wish to. He hesitated. To marry, your reputation will matter. The implication that she might marry someone else sent a pang through Josephine's heart. Is that what you think I want, to appear proper so I can attract a suitable husband? I think you deserve every option, Xavier replied quietly. And I don't want my presence to limit those options. They had reached the ranch, the familiar buildings a welcome sight after the tensions of town. Xavier brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house but made no move to descend. Josephine turned to face him fully. Look at me. Reluctantly, he met her gaze, his blue eyes guarded. I don't care what the town thinks, she said firmly. I care about running this ranch successfully, and I need you healthy and well-rested to help me do that. The bunkhouse stays your quarters. For a long moment, Xavier studied her face, something shifting in his expression. As you wish, Miss Josephine. The formality still stood between them, but Josephine sensed that something important had been communicated nonetheless. As they unloaded the wagon in companionable silence, she felt a renewed determination to not just survive but thrive on her own terms, regardless of what convention dictated. The arrival of Xavier's friends 3 days later marked another turning point for the ranch. Nathan Cole, the blacksmith, was a broad-shouldered man with an easy laugh and skilled hands. Thomas Hawk, the tracker, was quieter, with watchful eyes that missed nothing and a dry sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments. Both men treated Josephine with immediate respect, taking her authority for granted in a way that most of Breckenridge's residents never had. Within days, they had settled into the rhythm of the ranch, their presence easing the workload and bringing a sense of security that allowed everyone to rest easier. With the additional help, Josephine found she had more time for the aspects of ranching she truly enjoyed, working with the horses, particularly the foals, and planning the improvements her father had always talked about but never implemented. Xavier often joined her during these planning sessions, offering insights and suggestions that complemented her own ideas. "If we extend the irrigation to this section," she explained one evening, pointing to a rough map spread on the kitchen table, "we could double the hay production next year." Xavier nodded thoughtfully. "It's good land, just needs water. Nathan says he can forge the metal parts we'd need for the sluice gates." These conversations, focused on the future of the ranch, gradually shifted into more personal exchanges as the days grew longer and summer settled over the Colorado highlands. They shared stories of their childhoods, discovered mutual interests in books and music, and developed the easy companionship of people who truly enjoyed each other's company. Yet Xavier maintained a certain reserve, never quite crossing the invisible line between friendship and something more intimate. Josephine found herself increasingly frustrated by this boundary, especially as she became more certain of her own feelings. The restraining order against Holloway seemed to be working. There had been no further incidents since Reese's arrest. Sheriff Davis rode out occasionally to check on them, each visit a little less formal than the last. Even the townspeople's attitudes were slowly changing, with more merchants treating Josephine with genuine respect when she conducted business in Breckenridge. By midsummer, the ranch was flourishing. The cattle were fat on the lush highland grass, the hay crop promised to be abundant, and the foals were growing strong. Hope, in particular, was developing into a beautiful filly with her mother's stamina and a spirit that reminded Josephine of herself, determined and occasionally stubborn. On a particularly fine July evening, Josephine decided to ride out to her favorite spot on the property, a small plateau overlooking the valley, where wildflowers grew in profusion, and the sunset painted the mountains in spectacular colors. She saddled her mare and was preparing to leave when Xavier appeared from the corral. "Going somewhere?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "Just up to the meadow," she replied. "I haven't been there in weeks." Xavier glanced at the setting sun. "It'll be dark soon." "I'll be back before then," Josephine assured him. "It's barely a 15-minute ride." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you mind company? I could use a break from fence mending." Josephine's heart lifted at the request. "I'd like that." They rode side by side through the golden evening light, the horses picking their way easily along the familiar trail. Neither felt the need to fill the silence with conversation, comfortable in each other's presence. The meadow was even more beautiful than Josephine remembered, awash with wildflowers swaying in the gentle breeze. They dismounted and let the horses graze while they walked to the edge of the plateau. "My father used to bring me here when I was a girl," Josephine said, gazing out over the valley below. "He said it was where he first knew he wanted to build a life in Colorado." "I can see why," Xavier replied softly. "It's magnificent." The setting sun bathed everything in a warm, golden glow, including Xavier's face as he stood beside her. Josephine found herself studying his profile, the straight nose, the strong jaw, the way his usually serious expression had softened in appreciation of the view. She said before she could lose her courage, "I need to ask you something." He turned to face her, curiosity in his blue eyes. "What is it? Why do you maintain such distance between us?" The question clearly caught him off guard. "Distance? I don't understand." "Yes, you do," Josephine insisted gently. "We work together every day, talk for hours, share meals and ideas, and everything except what we're actually feeling." Xavier's expression grew guarded. "Miss Josephine, that," she interrupted. "That right there. You still call me Miss Josephine even when we're alone, even after everything we've been through together, as though you need to remind us both of our respective positions." He looked away, back toward the sunset-painted mountains. "It's the proper way to address you." "Proper?" Josephine repeated, unable to keep the frustration from her voice. "I'm tired of proper. I'm tired of pretending I don't care for you more than as an employee." Xavier went very still, his eyes fixed on the horizon. For a moment, Josephine feared she had made a terrible mistake, misreading his feelings entirely. Then he spoke, his voice low and strained. "It wouldn't be right," he said. "You're my employer, He paused, struggling with the words. You're a lady who deserves better than a half-breed cowboy with nothing to his name." The raw honesty in his voice made Josephine's heart ache. "Is that what you think? That I care about your heritage or your possessions?" "The world cares," Xavier replied, finally turning to face her. "And you have to live in that world. The things people would say, people already talk," Josephine reminded him. "They talked when I claimed my inheritance, when I hired you, when I refused to sell to Holloway. Let them talk. I care about what you think, not them." The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "I think," he said slowly, deliberately, "that you are the most remarkable woman I've ever known. I think I've been falling in love with you since the day I broke down your door." The simple declaration sent a wave of joy through Josephine. "Then why keep your distance?" "Because loving you doesn't mean I should act on it," Xavier said, though the resolve in his voice was weakening. "You deserve someone who can give you a secure future, who won't make your life more difficult just by being at your side." Josephine stepped closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I deserve someone who sees me as I am and loves me for it, someone who believes in what I'm trying to build here, someone who breaks down doors when I need help and stands beside me when I face my enemies." She reached up to touch his cheek gently. "I deserve you, if you'll have me." For one breathless moment, Xavier remained perfectly still, his eyes searching hers. Then, with a sound that was half sigh and half surrender, he lowered his head and kissed her. The kiss was tentative at first, as though he still couldn't quite believe this was happening. Then Josephine's arms slipped around his neck, and his restraint crumbled. He pulled her closer, one hand at the small of her back, the other tangling in her hair as the kiss deepened into something hungry and honest and long denied. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Josephine," he whispered, her name without the formal miss sounding like a prayer on his lips. She smiled up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. "That's better." They stayed on the plateau until the first stars appeared, talking about everything they had left unspoken for so long. Xavier told her of his fears that loving her would bring her hardship, that his mixed heritage would make their life together difficult, that he had nothing material to offer her. Josephine countered each concern with the pragmatism that defined her. "I've already faced hardship," she pointed out. "Having you at my side would make it easier, not harder. As for your heritage, any man who would judge you for it is not someone whose opinion matters to me, and material things." She laughed softly. "I have a ranch that needs a partner who understands it as you do. We're stronger together, in every way." As darkness fell completely, they reluctantly mounted their horses for the ride back. Xavier reached across the space between them to take her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that made Josephine's heart skip. "We should head back," he said. "The others will wonder where we've gone." Josephine nodded, though part of her wished they could stay in this moment forever, away from the complexities that awaited them. "What will we tell them?" Xavier considered the question as they started down the trail, riding close beside each other. "The truth, I suppose. That things have changed between us. And the town," his smile was visible even in the moonlight, "they've been gossiping about us for months anyway, might as well give them something real to talk about." Josephine laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I like that plan." The lights of the ranch came into view, the windows of the main house glowing warmly against the night. As they approached, Nathan emerged from the bunkhouse, raising a hand in greeting. "Was about to come looking for you too," he called. "Supper's getting cold." Josephine and Xavier exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. Xavier dismounted first, then moved to help Josephine down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist. "Everything all right?" Nathan asked, his gaze moving between them with sudden comprehension. "Better than all right," Xavier replied, not releasing Josephine's hand as they walked toward the house. Nathan's broad grin said everything about his approval. "About damn time," he muttered, falling into step behind them. "Thomas owes me $5. The transition from employer and employee to openly acknowledged sweethearts was not without its challenges. The ranch hands adjusted quickly, treating the development with a mix of good-natured teasing and genuine happiness for their friend. Xavier moved his few possessions from the bunkhouse to a small room off the kitchen in the main house, close enough for propriety's sake, but acknowledging the shift in their relationship. Breckenridge, predictably, reacted with a mix of scandal and fascination. Some, like Mrs. Whitmore, openly disapproved of the match. Others, particularly the younger generation, found it romantic. Sheriff Davis, during one of his regular visits, simply commented that he'd seen it coming for months and offered Xavier a cigar in congratulations. Holloway, serving 30 days in the territorial jail for his role in the attempted kidnapping, was reportedly furious when the news reached him. But with his reputation in tatters and his business associates distancing themselves, his threats carried little weight. By August, life had settled into a new routine. The days were filled with the work of the ranch harvesting hay, preparing for the fall cattle sale, training the young horses. The evenings were for planning and conversation, often with Nathan and Thomas joining them on the porch as they discussed the ranch's future. It was during one such evening that Xavier first raised the subject of marriage. The others had retired for the night, leaving them alone beneath the star-filled sky. "I spoke with Reverend Miller today," Xavier said, his voice casual though his eyes were intent on Josephine's face. "Asked him some hypothetical questions about mixed marriages in the territory." Josephine's heart quickened. "Did you now, and what did the good Reverend say?" "Said there's no law against it in Colorado territory, though some folks might not approve." Xavier took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Said he personally believes love sanctified before God is what matters, not the color of the lover's skin." "Reverend Miller is wiser than I gave him credit for," Josephine replied, leaning her head against Xavier's shoulder. "He also said," Xavier continued, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "that he'd be happy to perform such a ceremony whenever the couple in question felt ready." Josephine lifted her head to look at him directly. "Are you asking me to marry you, Xavier Jackson?" The smile that transformed his face made him look younger, almost boyish in his happiness. "I am, though not very well. I should be on one knee with a ring and flowery words." "I've never had much patience for excessive ceremony," Josephine assured him, her own smile threatening to split her face. "A simple question deserves a simple answer. Yes, I will marry you." Xavier's kiss was tender, filled with promise and a joy so complete it brought tears to Josephine's eyes. When they broke apart, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "I do have this," he said, opening his hand to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl set in the center. "It was my mother's. She told me to give it to the woman who claimed my heart completely." As he slipped the ring onto Josephine's finger, she felt as though every struggle, every moment of doubt and fear since her father's death, had been leading to this moment of perfect clarity. This was where she belonged on the ranch her father had built, with the man who had helped her make it truly her own. They were married in September, when the aspens were turning gold on the mountainsides and the first hint of autumn crispness touched the air. The ceremony was small but well attended, with not just the ranch hands but a surprising number of townspeople making the trip out to witness the union. Josephine wore a simple dress of ivory silk, her hair adorned with wildflowers from the plateau where they had first confessed their feelings. Xavier, standing tall and proud beside Reverend Miller, wore a new suit that Nathan had insisted on buying him as a wedding gift. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began, his voice carrying clearly across the ranch yard where chairs had been arranged for the guests. "We are gathered here today to witness the joining of two remarkable souls." As they spoke their vows, Josephine felt a sense of rightness that transcended the whispers of the more conservative guests. This was her choice, her future, her happiness. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Miller concluded with a warm smile. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Jackson." Xavier's kiss was restrained given their audience, but his eyes promised more once they were alone. The cheer that went up from the gathered guests, led enthusiastically by Nathan and Thomas, brought a blush to Josephine's cheeks. The celebration continued well into the evening, with food and music and dancing under lantern light. Even Sheriff Davis took a turn spinning Josephine around the improvised dance floor, whispering that he'd never seen a more fitting match, before returning her to Xavier's waiting arms. As the night deepened and the last guests departed, Josephine and Xavier stood on the porch of what was now truly their home, his arm around her waist as they watched the final wagon disappear down the drive. Mrs. Jackson, Xavier murmured against her hair, has a nice ring to it. It does, Josephine agreed, leaning into his embrace. Though I think the deed will remain in the name of Eastwood for business purposes. Josephine Eastwood Jackson, perhaps, Xavier chuckled. Always practical, my wife. The word sent a thrill through her. My husband, she replied, turning in his arms to face him. I like how that sounds. His kiss was no longer restrained but filled with the promise of the night to come and all the nights that would follow. As he lifted her into his arms to carry her over the threshold, Josephine was struck by the journey that had brought them here, from a locked door to a shared future, from professional distance to the most intimate of connections. I love you, Josephine Jackson, Xavier whispered as he laid her gently on their bed. And I love you, she replied, drawing him down to her, more than I ever thought possible. In the years that followed, the Eastwood Jackson Ranch became one of the most successful operations in Summit County. Xavier's knowledge of horses, combined with Josephine's head for business, created a breeding program renowned throughout Colorado territory. Hope, that first foal they had welcomed together, became the foundation of their breeding stock, producing colts and fillies that commanded top prices at the Denver horse auctions. Nathan and Thomas stayed on, becoming not just employees but family. When Nathan married a widow from town in 1878, they built a small cabin on the ranch property. Thomas never married, but his quiet presence and uncanny ability to predict weather changes became legendary in the area. Holloway eventually left Breckenridge for Denver, his ambitions for the Eastwood property thwarted by Josephine and Xavier's success. The town, which had once been scandalized by their union, gradually came to accept and even celebrate the couple whose ranch brought prosperity to the region. In the spring of 1877, Josephine gave birth to their first child, a son they named David, after her father. Xavier, who had faced his own share of prejudice, was determined their children would grow up proud of their mixed heritage and strong in the face of whatever challenges it might bring. By 1883, the ranch had expanded to 30 acres, with a new and larger main house built by Xavier's own hands. Their family had grown as well, with the addition of twin daughters, Alina and Margaret, in 1880, and another son, Benjamin, in 1882. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Xavier surprised Josephine with a special gift, the deed to the plateau where they had first declared their love, officially registered as Josephine's Meadow in the county records. So it will always be yours, he explained as he presented her with the document, even if someday the rest of the ranch passes to our children. Touched beyond words, Josephine could only hold him close, marveling at how a moment of misfortune, being locked out of her own home, had led to the greatest happiness of her life. Xavier Jackson had indeed broken down more than just her door that day. He had broken through the barriers she had built around her heart, proving that sometimes the most unexpected knocks are the ones most worth answering. In the autumn of 1896, as Josephine and Xavier sat on the porch of their home watching their youngest grandchild taking her first tentative steps across the yard, a visitor from the Denver Historical Society arrived to document their story as one of the pioneer families of Summit County. You've built quite a legacy here, the young historian remarked, looking out over the prosperous ranch with its fine horses and well-maintained buildings. What would you say was the key to your success? Josephine and Xavier exchanged a look filled with the understanding that comes from decades of shared life, the joy and sorrow, the struggle and triumph that had defined their journey together. Sometimes, Josephine answered with a smile, reaching for her husband's hand, the most important doors in life are the ones we never plan to open. Xavier's fingers tightened around hers, his blue eyes still keen despite the silver that had long since replaced the black in his hair, crinkling at the corners with shared memory. And sometimes, he added, the love of 20 years evident in his voice, breaking down the right door is just the beginning of the story.